MTN says it is reviewing claims it violated anti-terrorism laws in the United States. Several firms are accused of paying protection money to militant groups in Afghanistan. The defendants named in the complaints are 6 different groups, one of which is MTN and its subsidiary companies in Afghanistan. Most of the companies are based in the West. Let's chat more on this top story with our guest in studio, Economist. Of course, Miyelani Mkhabela, and he's an economist with Antswisa Advisory. Thank you so very much for joining us here on the agenda. We do appreciate your time.
Thanks, and the viewers.
Yeah, just to paint for us a picture really of how big a scandal or how big a story like this is. I mean, we've seen it, also on international news. What kind of impact would this have on MTN?
I think the accused scandal, it's an impactful issue globally. When you look at what the Taliban or the issues of Afghanistan and America and the terrorism all over the world. So the impact it can be if MTN is accused of financing terrorist activities, then it gets to be very big as well, like looking on the stock of MTN or the capital markets as to how the stock will relate in response to that, and how probably other investors will look at reacting in whether withdrawing from investing in MTN. And at the same time, you look at the United States as a big economy, and looking at how US is going to respond, it can probably have an impact that can need the South African president and the US president to probably come and discuss how probably they can go around this issue moving forward.
You're talking about investors, and I'm sure they're sitting where they are quite nervous at the moment. I also just want to talk about, the Zakhele Futhi shareholders. I mean, what should they be thinking at this point? And the fact that, they've sort of put money into this company that at the end of the day might be involved in something that could be so significant and so, one could say terrible in terms of, basically financing a terror group.
The Zakhele shares happens to be as well one of the units within MTN shares. So if MTN is impacted in general, probably the whole stocks that are related to MTN will have to be impacted. So they will probably have to look at ways on how they manage those shares. There are a lot of other activities that capital markets strategists will work around to ensure that the stocks are not plummeting to a level where it can cost the investment commitments from investors. But at the same time, when you look on the MTN being the biggest African telecommunications, and then you look at it being a number 8 globally as a telecommunications company. So you are looking at a very big company that has investors from different communities, and that can have as well an impact from South Africa point of view. Our telecommunications shares and MTN basically, because the index MTN carries as well a great point within the index in the JSE listed companies.
You've mentioned the fact that it's not just MTN which would be impacted, and I can imagine when you have a company as big as MTN that there would be some sort of, I suppose, domino effect of several companies and perhaps even our own government that would be affected. Can you paint for us the sort of worst case scenario that we should, as South Africans, sort of brace ourselves out of the storm?
I think MTN must probably attend to, they must quickly reflect on this, and then as well the investor relations for MTN, the CEO, as well as like involving the president of the country to look at how they can mitigate the risk aligned with this issue. So that can be one of the critical aspects that they will have to do. And the second, the second element, it's, I mean, like all companies that we have in the JSE, I think now like we get to be learning one critical part, which is not shareholder capitalism, but stakeholder capitalism. That will lead to all our listed companies to have like social impact like relationships with all stakeholders, and the shareholding of each and every enterprise or corporation, it must as well benefit all like all stakeholders. If then we arrive at that stakeholder capitalism, you know, all companies will be mindful, and then they will be mindful to communities that they are doing business with, and they will be mindful from the international investment like community, but at the same time ensuring that whatever investment that they are doing is impactful. So in terms of the UN global, in terms of the UN responsible investment like systems or impact investment, all companies are always advised to only invest in activities that are not related to terrorism and that are as well impactful to communities. So when you look on those principles of investment or responsible investment, then you are attending to it as a clear guidelines that we need to have developments or investment that impact in communities, and investment mustn't affect like communities, of which on this instance you find that like there was like a bypass in terms of like rules and not attending to the rules. If UN get into that level of coming up with impact investment or developmental impact or principles of responsible investment, then you can see how sensitive are these kind of issues. But at the same time, you look at all companies to be corporate citizens wherever they do business, and MTN have a case at Nigeria, and then now we're looking at the same MTN having a case at MTN. That's not what we want in our South African companies. And I think, you know, one of the Davos topics 2020 speaks about redefining capitalism. In that redefining capitalism, you find a hybrid discussions of socialism and capitalism, where we speak about stakeholder capitalism. I believe that South African companies need to attend to that so that they are mindful in communities that they operate at.
All right, Mr. Mkhabela, you've now spoken about the UN. Of course, that's a scary thought at this time. But, you know, what happens then? You know, MTN is found indeed to have, you know, bribed these terrorist organizations, to have given them money. What are the consequences really for MTN? I mean, it's this huge company in South Africa. Is there a possibility of MTN sort of collapsing under such a scandal, if it turns out to indeed be true?
Not really. There are a lot of mitigations that can be attended to. MTN will in collapse. So MTN is a big company. Hence, I'm indicating its size in the South African market. It's number 1 telecommunications in Africa, and then it happens to be number 8 globally. So you look at a company that it can really moves JSE to come up with mitigations and help, and then look at maybe paying the fines that will be expected. And I'm not saying fines are the right thing. Companies must comply. Companies must be responsible in all areas that they do business. But in this case, because it's a reactive measure, we will have to ensure that like probably they comply in paying the fines that are expected from them. And the cost mustn't be to lose MTN because it is our heritage and it's our flagship global company, and then we need it.
You know, you talk about it being, you know, our heritage and a big company and all of that, but wouldn't paying a fine just be seen as a sort of a slap on the wrist? At the end of the day, terrorist organizations, they murder people, they kill people. This is what they do. That's what terrorist organizations do. We're not talking about a small scandal, you know, where there was a little bit of theft or some money taken here or there. We're We're talking about people's lives at the end of the day. So this is not, as you mentioned earlier on, it's not just a small scandal. So surely there should be, bigger repercussions if it is found indeed this did happen.
So in a good way, the company didn't pay directly to finance terrorism. So if they are found guilty, they will be found guilty, but in an instance of not having directly financed, or they can be indirectly financed terrorism, as the money that is alleged to have been paid by them might have financed terrorism. So a fine will be enough for them to probably unwind all these behaviors and get into a better rehabilitation. But at the same time, probably for South Africa to realize that our companies need to really commit to social impact and then look at systematic corruption and bribes as a critical thing that we don't have to be involved at. But the critical issue, which is impact at the same time, MTN employs a lot of people globally.
Correct.
So, if it collapses, how many people will be losing jobs? While we are speaking about only youth, that are 60% unemployment in South Africa only. And then when you look at Nigeria, they speak about poverty that is half of that country. And when you look at 180 million population and you look at half of that, it's you speak about a very huge number. So if South Africa and Nigeria doesn't have MTN, so you will look at the impact with regard to poverty, with regard to increasing inequality that is already there and perverse. But there is some measures that we are saying it is better because a lot of people are able to buy their whether it's bonds or other assets that they need. So it is good to have such a company that is employing a lot of people to be saved from all this mess that is happening, and then we get it to be find and operate for the future.
All right, thank you for sharing your insightful views with us there, Miyelani Mkhabela, economist at Antswisa Advisory. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, and the viewers.
All right.